I'm back again to show you some things from Chapter 5 in the Power of Critical Thinking, 7th edition. And this chapter is all about media manipulation, things like fake news, bias, and advertising, and what we as critical thinkers can do to weed those things out and to protect ourselves from being manipulated by them. So, practical applications. So our agenda today is walking through things about fake news, talking about reasonable skepticism, what is legitimate versus an illegitimate reason for accepting claims. We're going to talk about fact checking a little bit, assessing the reliability of online information, which is a big deal, of course, and this interesting thing called Pizzagate. And then there's a little bit about ethics here on what happens when we pass on fake news. Okay, what is that? How does that mess with other people, but also how does that reflect and change our ethics? And then media bias. What is the point of media objectivity? We think objective news from our folks, and we get it a lot of the times, I think, but bias is a problem, and of course we have to think about those kinds of things. Different kinds of definitions, denotation, connotation. Is there really an overall right or left bias in American news in general? And then we're going to talk about advertising. Um, advertising. Advertising is always about money, um, and how to get more of it away from you and into the manufacturers or owners' pockets. Something called micro-targeting, which is a fairly new, in the grand scheme of things, fairly new approach at advertising. We're going to talk about that. Editorial content and political ads and videos and what happens when they mess with those things. I've got some other notes here on the board that we'll get to kind of as we go along, and that's the overall view. I have 3 different things I'm working from here to kind of make sure I hit all pieces. And so sometimes I have to get them all to sync up again. And they're paper, so I can't just go dink with my phone and make them all better. But chapter 5 starts on page 145 in our book. There's quite a bit to go through here. I will tell you in previous editions, most of the information in this chapter was kind of smushed into chapter 4. And we already know chapter 4 is pretty big on its own, with the addition of social media stuff. And so this is a kind of a new chapter all the way around. But we know that if we want to search for something on the internet, you go to Google, whatever your favorite search engine is. But overwhelmingly in the States here, Google is the thing. And you search for something, okay? Say I want to know about the sirens I heard last night. Google. I'm going to ask, something about something near me, okay? And you get, all these things that you don't want to, that don't fit, but they're there. Or if we're looking to start a research paper. I give you a research paper, or your English teacher gives you a research paper, and you go to Google and you're like, okay, I'm going to pop in gun control, because that's a big deal right now. And you get probably 20 million hits. That used to be my hyperbole number, like, oh, it's 20 million things to do today. But no, you can actually get 20 million hits on Google. And what do you do with all that? There's no way in your whole lifetime and your grandkids' lifetime that you could read through all of that and sift it all. And so we've got to kind of figure some things out here right away. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. I learned something very new to me on page 146, very first paragraph. Of course, I knew what a bot was on the computer. It's a computer program pretending it's a human being. Or it's some computer program that's sent out there to watch for certain things. If somebody clicks this site, there's a bot that'll pop up and say, hey, got questions? I'll answer your questions. We have one on our homepage for the college. But there's also something called a sock puppet. which cracks me up because I'm thinking of Lamb Chop. You know, it is a song that it's that guy. Anyway, the sock puppet is a real person who assumes fake identities. Okay, so they're starting out as a lie. This has got to be problematic, right? But I never knew they were called sock puppets. That's kind of funny. We know that on between social media and just everyday internet stuff, anybody can put anything they want out there, and then it's there. Okay, so you're self-publishing, or you're just posting stuff that comes out of your head, and somebody picks it up and thinks, "Oh, this is real. This is true. I read it on the internet. It has to be true, right?" No, 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 no. Okay, this is what we talk about. Why we talk about in our English classes, writing classes, why we want you to go through the library website and look for certain things, because there's a really lot of false, misleading, weird stuff out there that nobody fact checks. Okay, we're going to talk about that too. Okay, so fake news. Deliberately false or misleading news stories that masquerade as truthful reporting. There's nothing in their presentation or their look or feel or understanding, whatever, that makes us clue into the fact that this isn't real. And in fact, the folks who are telling you this information want you to think it's real. Okay, so they're lying to you from the get-go, and they're trying to make you believe things that aren't really true. Now, most of the time, we know this from our own hearts, right? Most of the time when we lie about something, we're either trying to get out of a punishment, or we're trying to get something that isn't legitimately ours. Okay, whether that's accolades or money or whatever, but we're trying to get something that's not really ours. And this is a huge issue. And even if you're fairly savvy about your sources and your sites and all of that, there are still things that can pop in there every once in a while and totally mislead you. So we have to be careful. And we're going to talk about how to evaluate some of those things. Part of the problem with fake news, first of all, it's a lie, so we have to, think about the ethics of that. Not only are you lying on camera, basically, but you're lying with the hopes of ensnaring other people. For me, that's way up there on the evil mark. So you have to be careful. We get some things get called fake news that aren't fake news. And we have to be careful about that as well. We always have to consider our sources, but we also have to do a little bit of our own legwork. And I'll show you some really good fact checkers to kind of have kind of on speed dial, so that you know anything that goes, I don't know, go look at it. At the bottom of page 147, there's a little piece here that I want you to really pay attention to. Fake news, whether real or imagined, whether soothing or vexing, is bad for intellectual discourse, bad for the pursuit of knowledge, bad for sane politics, and bad for democracy. Critical thinking, whether pleasing or upsetting, offers a necessary corrective. Whether we like the stories or not, the fact that they're presented to us as fact, because that's what we expect from news, and their lies messes with everything that we call normal and right and good. And so we should do our best to weed these things out and make them known. Okay. Okay, sorry. On with, fake news. So we have lots of fodder, lots of things to kind of mull over and think about when we talk about fake news. fake news is harmful and destructive and dangerous. Sometimes when we believe fake news, we take action in ways that have um, long-term effects, not just for us, but for other folks. One of those cases is something they're calling Pizzagate. And you guys are probably, most of you are too young to remember actual Watergate was the first one like that. And it was called Watergate not because there was something wrong with water. There's a Watergate hotel in Washington, D.C., and that's where this bit of espionage, I guess is the right term, happened during President Nixon's term of office, causing him to be impeached and then resign, and his vice president resigned, and so we ended up with Gerald Ford as our president for a while. But anyway, Watergate was the name of the hotel. It wasn't a problem with water. Everything else now that's a scandal of some sort, we call it a gate. And I think that's kind of weird. Doesn't make any sense. But anyway, Pizzagate, what they're calling this Pizzagate. These ads, there was a bunch of social media posts, ads, whatever you want to call them, that purported that there was this pizzeria in, I believe, Washington, D.C. Yeah. That was basically a front for a child pornography / slavery ring run by the Democrats. Okay. And this was out there. I mean, if you put in Pizzagate, you'll get all kinds of information about this. But anyway, this young man from North Carolina got in his car or his truck with his guns and went to Washington, D.C. to free the children. Okay. Not only did he believe that this fake news was true, he believed he needed to act upon it. And so he goes to this restaurant and he fires his weapons. He doesn't kill anybody. He fires his weapons. Everybody freaks out and runs away. And of course, there's nothing going on there except pizza. This young man was sentenced to 4 years in jail and did 3 years of probation. So 7 years of his life locked up in the legal system because he believed with his heart fake news and went and did something about it. Now, seems kind of an extreme case, but if you look around, spend a little bit of time playing with this, there are, last time I looked, there have been over 1,000 arrests for people doing things, illegal things, scary things, based on their understanding of what turns out to be fake news. And I'm sure there are more than that, they just haven't been traced back to that particular cause, but it's a big problem. People believe lots of things. People believe lots of things that the rest of us are like, really? Okay. You know, false stories will always win the race between false and true because they're usually, more audacious, more exciting, more interesting, because they don't have to worry about telling the truth, than the true stories. And so they get our attention and we get wrapped up in them and bad things happen, whether as a direct result or as, an indirect result towards these things. Now, there are some overlaps from some other terminology you may hear. Fake news is a lie, okay? It's a falsehood intending to deceive. This isn't an accident, okay? The folks who put these things out want to divide people, make a ruckus, defame other people, and they're just all kinds of messes. Propaganda is deliberately biased or misleading information designed to promote a political cause or point of view. This is all on page 149. We hear a lot about propaganda, especially during election year, and we're coming up on those midterms. So we're getting more and more of those. But a lot of public relations work can seem like propaganda because they're promoting one candidate over all, but that's kind of their job. Propaganda is things that use lies and misinformation on purpose to make people fall in line with a particular idea or candidate. Opinions is not fake news unless there is a deliberate attempt to deceive. The same goes for things like inept reporting, sloppy writing. We make mistakes. Okay, everybody makes mistakes. Just because you're a journalist or you're even an expert in a field doesn't mean you're not going to make a mistake. Okay, but if the mistake is deliberate, then we get into fake news. Biased reporting is not necessarily fake news. Okay, it can overlap and become fake news if we have intentional deception. And remember that all fake news is intentional deception. If something didn't happen, but you say it did, that's a lie, right? That's intentional. It's not a misunderstanding. It's not something we can go, oh, well, everybody makes mistakes. Yes, we all make mistakes. We don't all make fake news, okay? There are other things that come along kind of sideways with this. A hoax is a lie intentionally fabricated to appear truthful and to gain advantage or to provoke a reaction. Now, we have all kinds of hoaxes out there. Some of them are done in the name of fun and interesting, and my distaste maybe might be too mild for April Fool's jokes are that most of them aren't jokes. Okay, people laugh at jokes. A lot of things that come out as April Fools are hurtful and harmful and cause distress. If your joke, if your hoax doesn't leave everybody laughing at the end, you went too far. Okay. Satire and sarcasm should be on here too. It's intended to be funny or outrageous. It's so outrageous that it should be obvious, but now that we have all this proliferation of fake news, it's not always obvious that we're making fun of something. We want you to see this as, oh, look, isn't this awful? But we're making fun of it. Think Saturday Night Live skits. And one of my favorite fun things to look at is The Onion. It's a satirical newspaper, used to be, now it's online all the time. And it's meant to be funny. Sometimes it's meant to be a look at, if we take this to its logical end, it's absurd. Okay, so now, how do we tell fake stuff from real stuff? Well, one is we got to check our evidence. We know this from previous chapters. Critical thinking, the way we accept or reject claims is based on their evidence. Okay, it's not who said it, right? It's not where it comes from. It's not because we like it. And if you really, really like something as a claim, you really need to spend a little bit extra time to make sure you're not falling for some trap. The big deal, and it's over here, reasonable skepticism. Doesn't mean you're an absolute skeptic, like we talked in chapter 2. We know things, we can know things, there are things that make sense, and that's what I mean by reasonable skepticism. Anything you see online, anything you see on TV, and a lot of times they're the same thing, always go, is that really true? Is that something I should believe in? Especially if it bumps up against what you already know to be true, right? That background knowledge that we talked about before. If it challenges that, okay, it might still be right, but we have to look at it a little closer, okay? And we're also looking at evidence, right? Legitimate reasons are those that increase the likelihood of a claim being true, okay? They don't just sound good, they are good. Okay. And then there's a whole bunch of illegitimate reasons to take up this claim. Sometimes we already know a source is good and reliable because we've looked at them in the past, or somebody we trust, very well, can point us in the right direction. Um, things like peer-reviewed journals and reliable newspapers and things like that. Things that follow as academic sources. You don't have to be too crazy about those things, but we have to be careful. And this is where there's 4 helpful strategies for evaluating online sources. The first one is to read laterally, okay? Laterally means go this way, right? We go out. And so you get off that site and you look that site up on Google and see where they come from, who funds them, what kinds of things do they publish, that kind of piece. Make sure you know who really is behind the information, uncover the purpose of that particular website or source, and find out how credible they are in general. Okay, if somebody if a particular website has a high rating of reliability from Snopes or Fact Checker or whatever, we can breathe a little easier. Okay. But we have to go do the work. And they give an example or 2 here of things that looked right, but were not. Okay. We can use, I'm gonna kind of go back and forth here. We can use Google and Wikipedia carefully, and they can show us a lot of things about websites and about different sources that we want to look at that are telling us things we would like to hear, because they have the ability to dig deep into things and say, oh, here's this. Okay. So by reading laterally, by reading critically, sorry, I forgot to turn my page. There we go. By reading laterally, we can get at the who and why and what is behind the information that we're reading. When we read critically, we know credibility relies on truth. Okay, so we have to look things up. Here are key questions to ask. There are 3 of them. Are the claims plausible? Do they make sense? Okay. What is the support for the claims? Where's their evidence? What kind of evidence do they give? Who do they quote? What do they cite? Or maybe they do none of that. And then third, have reliable fact-checking organizations examine the claims. Now, Trustworthy Fact Checkers is on page 157, and it has my favorite one on it. I love Snopes.com. They have all kinds of things in here about, what we call urban legends and, did so-and-so really die in this, whatever. PolitiFact, factcheck.org, trutherfiction.com, hoaxslayer.com, and all of these are very highly accurate. And there's a little bit in here about how to know if your fact checker really is a fact checker. They're nonpartisan, their funding is fully disclosed. They put their methodology and stuff right out there for you to see. They employ as much neutral wording as possible, minimize appeals to emotions and logical fallacies. They avoid partisan consideration in selecting topics to cover. That's a big deal, and we'll get to that too when we get to media bias a little bit. Okay, so other ones are in here as well, and they are very, very good. Okay, use Google and Wikipedia carefully. Remember that those first 3 or 4 results at the top of a Google list are really ads. They say sponsored. That means somebody paid to have their answer be at the top. Okay, lots of places pay lots of money for their results to be the first one you see. Think about it like this. I want to know what's on the menu at a particular restaurant. So I type that particular restaurant into my search bar, and it gives me not the restaurant that I asked for, but it gives me things like Grubhub and the other folks that go and get food for you, which is fine, but it's not what I want. I have to scroll down a bit before I can get to the actual website of, whatever restaurant I want to look at. Those ads go at the top because I got paid for. Okay, Wikipedia is a good place to start your research paper or the research for your papers, because if you go to the very end of the topic, most of the time there are these huge lists of resources, and it will help you kind of weed things out. A lot of Wikipedia is very good, but since the authors are anonymous, it's hard to tell right up front if something is going to be correct or not. Okay, so the last thing is to check your own bias. We all like certain things certain ways, and my OCD reacts to this very well. I like to see certain things. I like to hear from certain sources, folks, whatever. And I want the folks who I like to be truthful and kind and wonderful, right? They're not always, neither am I, so, you have to make sure to look for, remember, disconfirming evidence. If you've got a favorite idea or place or source, you still need to look and see, okay, what else is out there? Who disagrees with this? Are they reasonable? Should I disagree with this? Should I meter my response? So there's that. Media bias, we say we want the objective truth, okay? Problem with that, and Dr. Vaughn goes through 3 or 4 pages about why this is problematic. It is nearly impossible for any of us to be completely objective about everything, or really anything. It has to go through our brains, which are, constructed over time by our experiences and what we've learned, and our families, and what we privilege and what we don't. And so we have a bias. The best way that our media can serve us is to let us know what their biases are up front. Okay, it's like the truth checkers, fact checkers. You have to know what's going on. You have to know that this person is, the list of their attributes. And sometimes it means that we have to know that just because we like what we read in a particular periodical doesn't mean we can stop there. Okay, if we want to be informed, we want to be critical thinkers, we want to know that what we believe is true, then we have to do some work. Okay, and that's usually the answer to pretty much everything. You want X, you got to do some work. You want Y, you got to do some work. So this idea of objectivity and bias, and so these are going to be our big words from this chapter. Objectivity in journalism, then, is ensuring that the story exhibits no explicit or implicit preference for one set of values over another. Okay? Now, this is what gets a lot of good people in trouble. Okay? We want things, stories, ideas that aren't neutral. We want them to agree with what we consider good, capital G or lower g, right? And so we have to be careful that we're not putting our own bias on the media when we expect them to have, for instance, Christian values, okay? That's not their job, okay? Unless you're getting your news from a particular religious outlet, your religion's outlet, it should have things that bother you, okay? Because it's not going to always give preference to your set of values, okay? And so we have to be careful when we're talking about objectivity that we're really not talking about a bias I don't agree with, okay? A bias is a distorted and unfair perspective caused by the values of the writer, editor, or venue. Now, by venue, I mean, okay, so this is from the New York Times, or this is from the Washington Post. Okay, so you have different pieces there. Sorry, my throat's giving out before I get done here, I think. The other part of this is we have to be careful not to automatically say that this particular person or article or venue is biased because they have a different view than we do. We have to think about distorted and unfair perspective. Okay? Now, somebody that we like does something they shouldn't, and somebody tells on them. Sounds like preschool, right? My best friend put dirt in somebody else's hair, and I'm going to tell the teacher. Or the kid with the dirt in his hair is going to tell the teacher. If they say, Susie put dirt in my hair, well, that's not bias. That's what happened, right? Now, we're disappointed in Susie, but there we go. So these two words are very important for us to have in our heads, very important for us to understand the difference between and how they might impact how we read things. Okay, so that's why they're big words. Okay, let's see what else I got here. There is a big section here on objectivity and how we get to this particular neutral version here. Because objectivity in and of itself is very, very difficult, if not impossible, for people to do. And we need to recognize that there are lots of ways in which perhaps somebody's bias shows, but it doesn't mean that they're not trying to be objective. Okay, and so distorted and unfair perspective, that's bias. It's the unfair part, distorted part that we have to watch for. Okay. We also have a little bit at the bottom of page 160, a little bit about rhetoric. We're going to get into more of that in the next chapter. But the way that we use rhetoric in logic, anyway, is that it's a use of emotional and evaluative words to skew the audience's view. And, you know, it's the available means of persuasion, right? And a lot of times we use particular words because they have certain connotations and because they have a particular denotation. Denotation is the literal or primary meaning, okay? Go to the dictionary, right? This is what we think this means. Now, the connotation is the baggage it carries, okay? All the emotional on that. You cannot say certain words without invoking an emotional response. And a lot of that depends upon which side of the coin you're on, okay? So you have to be very careful. Skewing the way we talk about things can show bias, okay? So for some people, in the bottom of 160, top of 161, there's a whole bunch of examples there. The idea that we can talk about the same idea in two different ways, depending upon whether we agree with it or don't, should show us a lot about what side of the ethics coin we're on as well. Evaluative terms are things that get a particular response from people. And we're not saying something is just good or bad. When we talk about school shootings, we talk about the horrific carnage left behind by these automatic weapons. And regardless of what side of that whole debate you're on, nobody wants to see more little kids get killed. That's just not what we're about. And so a lot of this depends, how we talk about it, depends upon what side of that particular issue, the gun issue, not the killing of innocents issue. So we have this other kind of reporting called advocacy journalism, and it's slightly more strong than an opinion. It's slightly less problematic than something fake news, but really it's people trying to get the public to understand a certain event or a certain idea in a way that kind of changes their mind. And most of the time, well, if they're ethical at all, the reporters who are doing this kind of advocacy journalism are very upfront about it. We want to close down X. Okay, we don't want drilling in the national parks or the ANWR up in Alaska, whatever. And so they're going to give you information that may not be or isn't totally objective. Okay, and so we have to be careful that we know that's happening. Okay, there's there's a nice little poll, little quiz on page 165, 166 about can you tell the difference between fact and opinion? A fact can be false, but it's still a fact, right? There's all kinds of interesting here. Okay, a factual statement, regardless of whether it was accurate or inaccurate, and an opinion statement, regardless of whether they agreed with the statement or not. These are the two different kinds of things the folks were asked to tell the difference here, and so you can take the test yourself. There are 10 little guys there. One of the things that we hear a lot is the idea that if you're a liberal person, then oftentimes it seems like the right side, the conservative side, has control of media, okay? Particular outlets, perhaps. But as a whole, there is no real evidence that the left or the right rules the media. And there's a couple pages on that kind of stuff. Okay, advertising. Advertising is all about money, okay? Advertising, I don't have it up there. Okay, I'm on page 168. Advertising is the practice of calling the public's attention to something to induce them to buy products or services or otherwise change their opinions or behavior. And they go on. Advertising is like air. It's everywhere, okay? Online advertising, you're playing a game and there's an ad. You're reading something on Facebook, there's an ad. There's a lot of everybody tries to sell you stuff. Okay, that's just how it works. All advertising is designed to influence, persuade, or manipulate us to an impressive degree, and in many ways it does successfully persuade or manipulate us, and we are often oblivious to it. Certain things we know are ads. We can choose to not look, go on. As soon as it says you can skip, whatever. But it's still there. Okay. Companies are willing to pay the price of advertising because it works. As innocuous as little catchy phrases or jingles or whatever, all the way up to and including manipulation, outright manipulation. Things like micro-targeting. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And again, we go back to reasonable skepticism. If you don't have a good reason to buy their claim, agree with their claim, then don't. They have to give you good evidence. Or they should have to give you good evidence. And then we get to not just advertising, but internet advertising. And digital advertising is, in my opinion, and lots of other folks, way out of control. There is no way to look away from your screen if you're on a social media platform. There's ads all the time, and sometimes they're good. They're good things, right? I am very much into sewing and quilting and fabric and all of that, and so I'm always happy when I see a new fabric store pop up on my Facebook feed. My credit card, not so much. Um, but internet advertising, even if you're one of the advertisers, is really difficult because it's paid and there are algorithms that basically allow us to see what we want, what we get to see. And it's really difficult to figure things out that way. I want to look at a couple of things in this idea of political advertising. Um, I didn't realize, and this is in the something in the chapter, I didn't realize that the first time we had negative televised, part of it's because it's television, and we really haven't had that all that long, was in 1964. And it was an innuendo, right? It was a little bit deceptive because, you know, here's this nice little girl looking at her daisy, and in the back, and then you get this mushroom cloud. Okay, this is during the Cold War, so, you know, we had a lot of weird things going on then. But the negative political ad, aside from, I would say they left out political cartoons, which have been around ever since we had people coloring things, I guess. The technology that we have now is so flawless and fluid that folks who know how to do this can doctor a video and or a picture or whatever, and we don't even know it. It's not obvious. It's really, really hard to tell. And so there are different ways that videos can be manipulated in order to better manipulate us. And we see them all the time, especially during political campaign years. Misrepresentation, basically, you're seeing the video just as it was shot, but the context that you're given is different from when it was shot. And this happens a lot when we have video with voiceover, okay? And so, not all the time, but a lot of the time, this is one of the easiest ways to do it, right? You're showing a video, and you get rid of the original audio and record something else, okay? Splicing, editing together disparate videos, putting things together that were never together. This happens a lot. Sometimes it's just to be funny, other times it's awful. But okay, all this is manipulation. And then doctoring is altering the frames of the video, either by photoshopping something in that wasn't there, changing an object that wasn't there before, just doing all sorts of manipulation so that your audience buys a certain idea that may or may not have been intended in the original. And then micro-targeting. This is a big deal. Choosing the ads and information individuals see on social media and other internet platforms. Okay, individualizing advertisements. I don't know if you guys ever saw Minority Report, but there's a point where after Tom Cruise gets his eyeballs fixed or gets somebody else's eyeballs, that he's walking through basically a public space. I forget if it's a mall or hospital or something. Anyway, public space. And the advertisement that's coming up for him is targeting that particular person, and they do it all with retinal scans. And so he's getting Mr. Morimoto's ads. And I remember when that came out, people were like, oh my gosh, can you imagine if that were really true? Well, here we are. Not the retinal scan stuff yet, but micro-targeting. You get a different set of ads than I do. We can be on Facebook at the same time, and my ads will be totally different from yours. And it's all kinds of interesting. Let me go. Okay. There are ways to check and make sure that you're getting truth in your life, and that is you have to do a little bit of legwork. Make sure that what you're taking as true really is trustworthy, and also take your time when you're reading online. Make sure you get the good stuff. So, have a nice day. Let me know if you have troubles. You know how to get a hold of me.